There are things you carry without knowing why. A song that plays in your head every time it rains. A sentence someone said to you once that you can't forget, even though you've forgotten their face. A feeling you get when you walk past a certain street corner, like your body remembers something your mind has let go. For me, it was a photograph. But I didn't know that yet. Not until a Tuesday afternoon in October when I found my own face staring back at me from inside a stranger's wallet. And the ground beneath everything I thought I knew about my life shifted like a floor giving way. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 32 years old. I run a small vinyl record shop called Second Spin on the corner of Maple and 4th in Portland, Oregon. It's the kind of shop that smells like old cardboard and dust and possibility, with milk crates full of records lining the walls and a turntable by the register where I play whatever fits my mood. On good days, I play Chet Baker. On bad days, I play Tom Waits. On days I don't know what I feel, I play Joni Mitchell and let her figure it out for me. The shop was my grandfather's before it was mine. He opened it in 1979 and ran it until his arthritis made it too painful to flip through the stacks. I took it over when I was 26, 2 years after I dropped out of a photography program at Portland State because I realized I was better at looking at beautiful things than I was at capturing them. Grandpa said that was the most honest thing I'd ever said, and then he handed me the keys. I loved the shop the way you love a living thing. It didn't make much money, but it made enough. And more importantly, it gave me a reason to wake up in the morning and a place to stand while the rest of my life figured itself out. Because the truth was, at 32, my life hadn't figured itself out. I lived alone in a studio apartment above the shop. I hadn't been in a serious relationship in 4 years. I had a handful of friends who I saw once a month, and a cat named Thelonious who judged me silently from the top of the bookshelf. I wasn't unhappy. I just felt like I was waiting for something, and I didn't know what it was, which is the loneliest kind of waiting there is. But let me tell you about the wallet, because that's where this story actually begins. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the shop was empty, which wasn't unusual for a Tuesday. Tuesdays had a particular silence to them, not the productive silence of a Monday when I was resticking, or the anticipatory silence of a Friday when I knew the weekend browsers would start filtering in. Tuesday's silence was the lonely kind, the kind that makes you aware of how much of your life you spend in a room by yourself, talking to no one, surrounded by other people's art. I was reorganizing the jazz section and listening to Miles Davis when I noticed something wedged between the cushion and the arm of the old leather reading chair by the window. That chair had been in the shop since my grandfather's time. The leather was cracked and faded to a warm caramel color, and it had a permanent impression of a human body pressed into it from decades of people sitting and reading liner notes. My grandfather used to say that chair had heard more confessions than a priest. It was a small brown leather wallet, worn soft at the edges, the kind that gets its shape from years of being carried in the same pocket. Someone must have left it while browsing. I picked it up and opened it to look for an ID, so I could call whoever had lost it. There was a driver's license. The name read Maya Rowan. The photo showed a woman with curly black hair, dark brown eyes, and a face that looked like it was halfway between laughing and thinking about something serious. She was 29. The address was local, about 15 minutes from the shop. I was about to close the wallet and set it behind the counter when something slipped out from behind the license. A Polaroid. It was faded and soft at the edges, the way Polaroids get when they've been handled too many times. The colors had shifted toward yellow and blue, the way old film does when it starts to forget what it saw. But the image was clear enough. It was me. Not me now. Me from years ago, younger, thinner, with longer hair that fell across my forehead, wearing a flannel shirt I hadn't owned since college. I was sitting on a bench somewhere outside, looking slightly to the left of the camera, not posing, not even aware the photo was being taken. I turned it over. On the back, in small handwriting, someone had written, "The Boy Who Stayed." June 14th. I stood in my shop holding a photograph of myself that I had never seen, taken on a date I couldn't remember, carried for what looked like years inside the wallet of a woman I had never met. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the feeling you get when you realize your life has a chapter you didn't know existed, and someone else has been reading it. I set the Polaroid on the counter and stepped back from it, like putting distance between us would make it less real. It didn't. If anything, the distance made it worse, because from 3 feet away I could see the photo more clearly, could see the way the light fell on my younger face, could see that I looked peaceful in a way I hadn't looked in years. Whoever took this picture had caught me in a moment of genuine stillness, the kind of unguarded quiet that you can't fake or pose for. This was taken by someone who was watching me when I didn't know I was being watched, and they had kept it for 7 years. If you've ever discovered that someone has been thinking about you without your knowledge, carrying a version of you in their mind that you didn't authorize or even know existed, you understand the vertigo I felt in that moment. It's not flattering. It's not creepy. It's something else entirely, something that doesn't have a word in English. The realization that you exist in someone else's story in a way you never imagined, and that their version of you might be more important than your own. I didn't call Maya Rohan. I should have. The normal, reasonable thing to do was to call the number on the license. Say, "I found your wallet. Come pick it up." But I couldn't, because I needed to understand why my face was in her wallet, and I was afraid that if I called her, she would give me an answer that made everything ordinary again, and I wasn't ready for this to be ordinary. So I waited. I put the wallet in the drawer behind the register and I waited, because I knew that whoever had left it would come back. People always come back for their wallets. But waiting, it turned out, was its own kind of torture. That night I took the Polaroid home and set it on my kitchen table and sat across from it like it was a person I was interviewing. I stared at my own face from 7 years ago and tried to remember the day it was taken. June 14th, I would have been 25, probably between classes at Portland State, probably carrying my camera everywhere the way I used to. But the specific day was gone, erased by time and by the thousands of ordinary days that had piled on top of it. The handwriting on the back haunted me most. The boy who stayed where? Stayed for what? Who was I to this woman? And why had she chosen that word? Stayed, as if leaving had been the expected thing and I had done something remarkable simply by not doing it. I barely slept that night. I kept picking up the Polaroid and turning it over and reading those 4 words and trying to feel my way backward through 7 years of forgetting to find the moment they were written about. Thelonious watched me from the bookshelf with an expression that clearly communicated he thought I was losing my mind. On Wednesday, I opened the shop and spent the entire day flinching every time the door chime rang. A teenager looking for a birthday present for his dad, a regular named Phil who came in every week to dig through the blues section, an older couple who held hands while they flipped through the classical crates. None of them were Maya Rowan. By closing time, I had reorganized the jazz section twice, alphabetized the soul section by label instead of artist and then changed it back, and drunk enough coffee to vibrate through the floorboards. I took the Polaroid out of my pocket 14 times. I know because I counted. She came back 2 days later. It was Thursday, late afternoon, and the light was doing that thing it does in October in Portland. Soft and golden and sideways, like the sun is trying to memorize the city before winter takes it away. The door opened, and a woman walked in. Curly black hair, dark brown eyes, wearing a green army jacket with paint stains on the sleeve and a canvas bag over her shoulder. She looked around the shop with the slightly panicked expression of someone retracing their steps. "Hi," she said. "I think I left my wallet here on Tuesday. Brown leather, kind of beat up. I found it," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I reached into the drawer, took out the wallet, and set it on the counter between us. She exhaled with relief and picked it up, checking the contents. License, a few cards, some cash. Then her fingers paused. She opened the billfold and looked at the slot behind the license, the slot where the Polaroid had been. It was empty because the Polaroid was in my back pocket. She looked up at me. Something moved behind her eyes, a flicker, fast and complicated, like a light switching on and off in a room you're not supposed to see into. "Everything there?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. "Everything's here. Thank you." She put the wallet in her jacket pocket and turned toward the door. She was 3 steps away from leaving my shop and taking the mystery with her. "Maya." She stopped. She didn't turn around right away. Her shoulders rose slightly, the way a person's do when they're bracing for something. Then she turned. "The Polaroid," I said. "Why do you have a picture of me?" The silence that followed was the loudest silence I've ever heard. She stood in the middle of my shop with Miles Davis playing softly on the turntable and October light falling across the floor in long amber stripes. And she looked at me the way you look at something you've been carrying in your mind for so long that seeing it in real life feels like a hallucination. "You found it," she whispered. "I found it, and I need to know why a woman I've never met has been carrying a photograph of me in her wallet." She didn't move for a long moment. Then she walked back to the counter. Slowly, like she was crossing a bridge she wasn't sure would hold her weight. She set her bag down and put both hands on the counter and took a breath. "Do you remember June 14th, 7 years ago?" she asked. I searched my memory. June 14th, 7 years ago. I would have been 25. Still in school, still doing photography. Nothing came. "No," I said. "I don't." She nodded, like she expected that answer. "You wouldn't. It wasn't a day that changed your life, but it changed mine," she told me. She stood in my record shop and told me the story of the worst day of her life. And with every sentence, I felt the ground shift a little more beneath my feet. 7 years ago, Maya was 22 years old and living in a studio apartment on Hawthorne Boulevard, 3 miles from where we were standing now. She was a photography student at Portland State, 1 year behind me in the same program, though we had never met. On June 14th, she received a phone call from her mother telling her that her father had been diagnosed with a terminal brain tumor and had 6 months to live. She walked out of her apartment and started walking without knowing where she was going. She walked for 2 hours through the city, crying, not seeing anything, until she ended up at a small park near the university campus. She sat down on a bench, and she couldn't move. She told me she sat there for so long that the light changed and the shadows shifted and people came and went around her and she couldn't feel any of it. She was disappearing into the worst thought a 22-year-old can have, that the person who made her feel safe in the world was leaving it, and she couldn't do anything except sit on a bench and let the knowledge crush her. "And then you sat down," she said. I stared at her. "I sat down on the same bench? You had your camera bag and a coffee, and you sat down on the other end of the bench, and you didn't say anything for a long time. You just sat there. You were looking at the trees, I think, or maybe the light. You had your camera out, but you weren't shooting. You were just observing. I had no memory of this, none, but I could picture it, because that park had been one of my regular spots. I used to go there between classes to sit and watch the light and think about nothing. I'd sit for an hour sometimes, just watching shadows move across the grass, trying to understand how light worked before I tried to catch it with a lens. I thought you were going to leave, she said. Everyone else who walked by looked at me crying and walked faster. That's what people do. They see pain, and they speed up because they're afraid it's contagious. But you didn't speed up. You didn't slow down either. You just sat down like it was the most natural thing in the world to sit next to a stranger who was falling apart. She took a breath, and I could see the effort it took to keep her voice steady. After about 20 minutes, she continued, you looked over at me. I was still crying. I was trying to be quiet about it, but I couldn't stop. And you said something? She paused. Her eyes were bright and full. You said, I don't know what you're going through, but I want you to know that whatever it is, you're not going through it alone, even if I'm just a stranger on a bench. The words hit me like a physical thing. I didn't remember saying them, but they sounded like something I would say, something my grandfather had taught me by example, that sometimes the most important thing you can do for another person is just be present. My grandfather used to say that the world is full of people who want to talk at you, but the rarest gift is someone who will sit with you and not need to fill the silence with their own voice. You didn't ask me what was wrong, she said. You didn't try to fix it. You didn't offer advice or platitudes or any of the things people say when they want to feel helpful without actually helping. You just sat with me for over an hour. You didn't check your phone. You didn't get up. You didn't fidget. You just sat there like you had all the time in the world and you had decided to spend it making sure a stranger knew she wasn't alone. Her voice cracked on the last word. She pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling and blinked hard, the way people do when they're trying to keep everything inside from coming out at once. At one point, she said, I stopped crying, not because the pain stopped, but because your presence had done something to it. It was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't this crushing thing anymore. It was just sad, manageable, sad, the kind of sad you can breathe through. When you finally got up to leave, you touched my shoulder, just once, and you said, it won't always feel like this. And then you walked away. You didn't look back. You didn't give me your number. You didn't even tell me your name. You just gave me the most important hour of my life and walked away like it was nothing. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old Nikon, the kind of camera a photography student would carry everywhere. I took the photo as you were leaving. You were sitting on the bench and you turned your head to look at something. I don't even know what, and I took it. One shot, I didn't even know if it would come out because my hands were shaking. But it came out, and I've been carrying it ever since. She set the camera down on the counter and looked at me with eyes that held 7 years of a story I didn't know I was part of. My father died 4 months later, and every day since then, when things get heavy, I take out that Polaroid and I look at the boy who sat with me on the worst day of my life, and I remember that I wasn't alone. You saved me, Ethan. You don't remember it, but you saved me. I couldn't speak. The shop was completely silent. Even Miles Davis had stopped. The record had reached the end of the side, and the needle was riding the inner groove, making that soft, rhythmic clicking that sounds like a heartbeat. I came around the counter, and I stood in front of her, and I said, I'm sorry I didn't remember. She shook her head. That's what made it beautiful. You weren't trying to be a hero. You were just being kind, and you had no idea what it meant. I reached into my back pocket and took out the Polaroid and held it between us. 2 versions of me in the room. The boy on the bench who didn't know he was changing someone's life, and the man standing in a record shop 7 years later, finally learning that he had. I think this belongs to you, I said, holding it out. She took it. Her fingers brushed mine and neither of us moved our hands away. I looked for you, she said quietly. For years, I didn't know your name. I only had this photo. I'd walk into coffee shops and bookstores and look for your face. When I moved to the east side last year, I started coming to this neighborhood because something about it felt right. I found your shop 2 months ago, and I started coming in to browse, but I could never be sure it was you. The hair was different. You were older, and I thought maybe I was imagining it, seeing what I wanted to see. You've been in my shop before. 3 times, I bought a Joni Mitchell record, a Bill Evans, and a Nina Simone. I remembered, not her face specifically, but I remembered selling those records. You have excellent taste, I said, and she laughed, a sound that came from somewhere real and deep and surprised, like she hadn't expected to laugh in the middle of this moment. I left my wallet on purpose, she said. What? I knew it was you by the 3rd visit. I recognized your hands. You have the same hands as the boy in the photo. But I couldn't just walk up to you and say, hey, I've been carrying your picture for 7 years. That's a conversation that sounds insane no matter how you frame it. So I left my wallet. I thought if you found the Polaroid, you'd either throw it away and I'd come get my wallet and pretend it never happened, or you'd keep it and ask me about it, and then I'd know. She looked at me with those dark brown eyes. 7 years of searching finally arriving at the other end. You kept it? I kept it. We stood there in the last light of an October afternoon, 2 people connected by a moment that only one of them remembered. And I realized that the thing I had been waiting for, the nameless, shapeless thing that had kept me feeling like my life was on pause, had been walking into my shop for 2 months, buying records I loved, and leaving just before I noticed. I asked her to stay. Not forever, not even for the evening, just for 1 cup of coffee, right now, in this shop, so that the stranger on the bench could finally become someone with a name, and a voice, and a story I could hold on to with both hands. She said yes. I made coffee on the little 2-burner I kept in the back room. The good stuff. The Ethiopian blend my grandfather used to order from a roaster in Southeast. I put on a record, Chet Baker, because it was turning into a good day. We sat in the 2 leather chairs by the window and talked while the sun went down and the streetlights came on and the shop filled with the kind of golden darkness that makes strangers feel like old friends. She told me about her father. His name was James S. He was a carpenter who built furniture with his hands and read poetry at the kitchen table every morning before anyone else woke up. He taught Maya how to use a camera by handing her a disposable Kodak when she was 7 and saying, "Show me what the world looks like through your eyes." She told me he used to take her to the hardware store every Saturday morning, and they would walk through the lumber aisle, and he would run his hand along each plank and tell her that every piece of wood had a story. You just had to sand it down far enough to find it. She told me about his last months, how he forgot words first, then faces, then how to hold a fork, how her mother slept on the floor beside his hospital bed every night for 3 months, because she couldn't bear the thought of him waking up confused and alone. How, on his last lucid day, he looked at Maya and said, "Don't stop looking, sweetheart. The world needs people who look at things carefully." She told me about the months after his death, how she dropped out of the photography program because she couldn't pick up a camera without thinking of him, how she spent a year working at a plant nursery, because being around growing things was the only thing that made the grief feel survivable, how she eventually picked the camera back up, not because the grief was gone, but because she realized that putting it down was a different kind of losing him. She told me that the Polaroid of me had become a kind of compass, not romantic, not obsessive, just a reminder that kindness exists in the world, even when the world feels cruel, and that sometimes a stranger on a bench can give you a reason to keep going without even knowing it. And I listened. The way I apparently listened 7 years ago, with my whole body, without checking my phone, without rushing to fill the silence. Except this time I was aware of it. This time I knew what was happening. After she finished, I told her about my grandfather, how he ran this shop for 40 years and knew every customer by name and by the record they were searching for. How he told me once that the most important record in the shop isn't the one on the turntable. It's the one someone hasn't found yet but needs to hear. How, when my grandmother died, he didn't close the shop for a single day because he said the music needed to keep playing for the people who needed it, even when the person who needed it most was him. How he died 2 years ago and left me the shop and a note that said, "Keep playing the music, Ethan. Someone always needs to hear it." Maya's eyes filled when I told her that. "He sounds like you," she said. "I think I sound like him." "Then I owe him too," she whispered. We closed the shop together that night. She helped me stack the crates and sweep the floor and lock the front door, and we moved around each other in the small space with a kind of ease that made no sense for 2 people who had only just learned each other's names, but made perfect sense for 2 people who had been connected by an invisible thread for 7 years without knowing it. As I turned the key in the lock, she stood behind me and said, "This is a good shop, thanks." "No, I mean it. It feels like someone's living room, like you could walk in off the street and just exist here for a while without anyone asking you to buy something or be something. That's rare." I thought about my grandfather, standing behind this same counter for 40 years, and I understood for the first time that what he had built wasn't a business. It was a refuge, a place where people could come and be around beauty without any obligation other than to listen. "My grandfather would have liked you," I said. "How do you know?" "Because you understand what this place is. Most people think it's a store. You know it's a church." She laughed, and the sound echoed off the empty walls and the silent record crates, and it sounded like the shop itself was laughing with her. I walked her home. It was 12 blocks, and we took the long way, through the park, past the bench where I had apparently sat with her on the worst day of her life. I didn't remember the bench, but I recognized the spot, the angle of the path, the way the streetlight hit the trees. My body remembered what my mind had forgotten. The night air was cool and smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke from someone's fireplace. Our footsteps fell into sync without either of us trying. That unconscious rhythm people find when they're walking toward the same thing. We stopped in front of the bench. She took out the Polaroid and held it up, matching the angle of the shot to the scene in front of us. The bench was the same. The trees were taller. 7 years of growth between then and now. "This is where you saved me," she said. "I didn't save you. I just sat down." That's the same thing, Ethan. Sometimes sitting down is the bravest thing a person can do. I thought about that, about how the world celebrates grand gestures. The speeches, the chases through airports, the declarations shouted from rooftops. But the truest acts of love I had ever witnessed were small and quiet. My grandfather playing records for an empty shop, my grandmother leaving a glass of water on his nightstand every night for 50 years, a 25-year-old kid sitting on a bench next to a crying stranger because walking away felt like the wrong thing to do. Maybe courage isn't always loud. Maybe sometimes it's the quietest thing in the room. She put the Polaroid back in her wallet, in the slot behind her license where it had lived for 7 years. Then she looked at me and said, "Will you sit with me again?" We sat on the bench. The same bench, 7 years later, under the same trees but taller, in the same city but different, as the same people but changed. She leaned her head against my shoulder and I put my arm around her and we sat there in the dark, listening to the sounds of Portland at night. A distant siren, a dog barking, someone laughing in an apartment above us. The whole messy symphony of a city full of people who have no idea how connected they are to each other. After a while she said, "I'm scared." Of what? That this is the kind of moment that only works once. That tomorrow you'll wake up and I'll just be the strange woman who had your picture in her wallet. And this will feel like a dream you can't get back to. I took her hand. Her fingers were cold from the October air and I held them between both of mine the way. "You hold something you've just been told is irreplaceable. I waited 7 years to find you," she said. "I've been waiting my whole life," I said. "I just didn't know for what." She looked up at me, and in the half-light of the park, with the street lamp catching the edges of her curls and the wind moving through the trees above us, she looked exactly like someone worth carrying a photograph of for 7 years. I kissed her, softly, slowly, the way you play a record for the first time when you already know it's going to be your favorite. She kissed me back, and her cold hand came up to my face, and I tasted salt and realized she was crying. And I was crying too. Two people on a bench in the dark undoing 7 years of distance in a single moment. When we pulled apart, she kept her hand on my face and looked at me with an expression I will never forget. Not joy exactly, not relief, but recognition. The look of a person who has finally found the thing they've been searching for, and can't quite believe it's real and solid and warm beneath their fingers. "I was starting to think you weren't real," she whispered. "That maybe I'd made you up. That the boy on the bench was just a story I told myself to get through the hard days." "I'm real," I said, "and I'm not going anywhere. Promise. I'm a guy who sits on benches. I don't go anywhere." She laughed, and the sound broke the solemnity of the moment in exactly the way it needed to be broken. And suddenly we were just two people laughing on a bench in October, and the weight of 7 years lifted off us like fog burning away in morning light. The weeks that followed felt like a song I had been hearing through a wall my entire life and was finally listening to clearly. Maya came to the shop every afternoon. She brought her camera and took photographs of the light coming through the windows, the dust motes floating above the record crates, my hands flipping through the stacks. She said she was rebuilding her portfolio. I said she was just looking for excuses to hang around. She said both things could be true. She showed me her photographs from the past 7 years. The plant nursery, the streets of Portland in rain, portraits of strangers she met on buses and in laundromats, people who reminded her of the boy on the bench, people who had kind hands or patient eyes. An entire body of work built around the idea that gentleness is worth documenting. I showed her my grandfather's collection in the back room. The records he had kept for himself over 40 years. First pressings and rarities and albums signed by musicians who had wandered into the shop by accident and stayed for hours. We played them together on Sunday mornings with coffee and the door locked and the closed sign up, and she would sit cross-legged on the floor with her eyes closed and listen the way my grandfather used to listen. Like music was a physical thing that could hold you. One Sunday, 3 weeks after the wallet, she brought a small framed print and set it on the counter. It was the Polaroid, scanned and enlarged and printed on archival paper. But she had changed something. The original photo showed just me, sitting on the bench, looking to the left. In the new version, she had printed a second image beside it, taken from the same bench, same angle, same time of day, but 7 years later, the bench was empty. The trees were taller. The light was the same. Two photographs side by side, the same place, 7 years apart. One with a stranger and one without, and the space between them was the whole story. She had written something beneath the paired images in her small, careful handwriting. The boy who stayed, the woman who looked, and the 7 years it took for a bench to become a beginning. I hung it on the wall behind the register, right next to my grandfather's note about keeping the music playing. And every morning after that, when I opened the shop and turned on the lights and put a record on the turntable, I looked at those two photographs and the note beside them, and I thought about how strange and beautiful it is. That the most important moments of your life can happen without you knowing. That you can change someone's world just by sitting down and staying. And that sometimes the person you've been waiting for has been looking for you the whole time. Carrying your face in her wallet like a prayer she never stopped believing would be answered. Asterisk.